Hello everyone, welcome to another VWO webinar. My name is Utkarsh Rai and I take up growth marketing initiatives at VWO. I'll be moderating today's session. For this session, we're excited to host CRO leaders from AWA Digital. First, we have Mr. Johan van Tonder, who is joining us from London. Johan is famously known for his book titled E-commerce Website Optimization, which kind of helps e-commerce marketeers in understanding why most of e-commerce website visitors don't buy and what they need to do about it. Johan is also the CEO of AWA Digital. Joining him for this session, we have Phil Cape, who has over 20 years of experience in driving online sales for businesses like Samsung, BBC, Ricoh, and Virgin. Currently, he's an optimizer at AWA Digital. We welcome you guys. AWA Digital is a renowned conversion optimization agency which works with businesses like Canon and Interflora to help them improve their online experience and increase their conversion rates. In this session, we are discussing about how personas can shape your optimization program. And to discuss this agenda, we are kind of going through around what makes a good persona, using personas to drive tests, and how personas can lead to better results. So for any questions during the session, you can reach out to me on Twitter with today's hashtag #AskVWO. You can also use the GoToWebinars question, which is to ask us anything. We'll take your questions at the end of the session. We're recording the session and we'll share the webinar resources with you over email after the webinar. So let's begin. I would request Johan to take it over from here. Johan, over to you.
Thanks, Utkarsh. First, we have to acknowledge when we talk about personas that not everyone is a fan. And in fact, personas have developed a bad reputation in recent years. And we should also add that that's not undeservedly so. Nielsen did a recent study where they reported that only 15% of marketers think their personas are effective. And those are marketers who are actually using personas. Of those, 80% of them are confused by their own personas. So it's clear to see there's a problem there. Jason Fried, the founder of Basecamp 37 Signals, he's famous for this quote, and it illustrates, some of the criticism against personas: artificial, abstract, and fictitious. I don't think you can build a great product for a person that doesn't exist, says Jason Fried. And but of course, this is based on misconceptions. But it's easy to understand where these misconceptions come from when you look, for example, at the Wikipedia definition of personas. There it is. Personas are fictional characters. That's the first problem. Represent the different user types within a targeted demographic. Hopefully, within a couple of minutes, you'll see why this definition is so deeply problematic. Whilst technically it's not incorrect, it just doesn't capture the true spirit of personas. It's entirely the wrong emphasis. So let's look at what's wrong there. This is Jared Spool tweeting recently: demographics have no place in personas. Stop putting them in. And you'll see in that Wikipedia definition, personas being the emphasis, or demographics being the emphasis. And the reason for Jared Spool saying this is that demographics don't drive behavior. Your users come to your site because they have a goal. They come there with a goal. That's where everything starts, is their goal. And that's what you need to do, is try and put your finger on what those goals are. And once you've identified those goals, you'll see that there are different user types that have different goals, and that will be the basis for your segmentation. That will be the basis for your various different personas. Now, old school marketing relied almost exclusively on demographic data. But today we know that the majority of decisions are made on an emotional level. And so we need to understand what those emotional drivers are and how they're influencing the sale. The fears, uncertainties, the doubts, those are the things that personas document. So the first bad persona, and it's not hard to find these things, are personas that are so focused on demographics. I mean, there are useful bits in here, but that depends on whether it's marketing guessing and whether it's generated from real user feedback. But the real issue here is that it's so heavily focused on demographics, and we've already seen what the problem with that is. That's not what drives behavior. Some personas get it right by not focusing too much on demographics. But you know, these, for example, are personas from a main dating website. They focused 100% on what kind of dates people might be looking for. And that's good, but it needs something more to be actionable. Just like a persona has goals, your business has goals for those personas. And what do you want them to do? What are those micro conversions that map out that journey? Some personas, and this is quite a big problem, are just a picture of the average customer. And of course, the average customer, A, doesn't exist, and B, it goes against the very heart of personas. The very reason why you're doing personas is to break out of that average mold. You know, creating a site for the average means you're creating a site for the lowest common denominator. Seth Godin said, treat people differently, different people differently. Anything else is a compromise. And that's at the heart of personas. The biggest problem probably is personas that are not grounded in research. There is a special hell for marketers who base personas on anything other than proper research. Personas are all about research. It's not an afterthought. It's not a secondary factor. Personas equal research. It is a place to house your research findings, broken down by key segments most relevant to your business. Personas is a way to make your data come to life. It's a way to give that data a voice throughout the process. It is about the data. It's not about anything else. And so this definition really resonates with me. It's by Steve Milder in his excellent book, The User is Always Right. Personas summarize user research findings and bring that research to life in such a way that a company can make decisions based on these personas, not based on themselves. And you can see the important emphasis there on research and actionability, the ability to make a decision based on those personas. When you do it right, then this is the kind of number, and it's referenced from that same study that I quoted earlier on, Nielsen, 171% increase in marketing ROI if you do it properly. So how do we know what makes a good persona, and how do we get to that point? Phil, you done a couple of personas that are really good examples. Here's one. Why don't you talk us through it?
Sure. So just to echo what Johan was saying, actionable personas are always based on real data. So it's this persona in particular was done for Stagecoach Theatre Art schools. It's particularly focused on new franchisees. I don't know if you're familiar with the business, but Stagecoach Theatre Arts, they run theatre school programs for children, and it's all run on a franchise model all around the world. So one of the targets that they have, as well as creating new students, is to actually encourage new franchisees to come on board. So what they wanted to do at the start of a new web design project was to actually really sit down and work out exactly who all of these people are. And one of the things that we had to do was run through a series of workshops, both internally and externally with existing franchise holders. We ran user surveys. We analyzed all the data that we already had from microsites which were targeting this marketplace. And all of that information got put into a persona. And that really echoes what Johan has been saying, is that a persona is really only useful if it is based in fact. If there's any fiction in there, if you're making anything up, if you're making any assumptions, then everything that comes off the back of the persona is going to be wrong. So if you're designing a new website on fictional information, your website is not going to fit the bill. If you're doing a marketing campaign based on fictional information, it's not going to fit the bill. So this persona analyzes all that data, puts it all into one simple to use page. Yes, there's quite a bit of information on there, but it's a simple to use page that can be rolled out across all agencies, across the whole of the marketing department, and across the sales force as well. So just to have another example of the kind of personas that are useful is this one. This one is an excellent persona, mainly because it is based on very real data, to the point that have done such extensive user interviews that they even have consumer photographs of people who have already got these products or littered along the bottom of it. They examine the brands that these people like to use. They examine the media that these people like, the other websites that they like. It has all the information that a marketer, CRO expert needs to be able to make informed decisions. And that's the point of a persona, is if you're not making informed decisions about the goals and objectives, but the reasoning behind them, then you're never going to get anything meaningful out of them. However, when you do have a good persona, it has all of the information that you need to create a site, a campaign, or an optimization program. So there are 6 points really around creating a solid persona. And what we start off with is the handle, and that essentially is that little bit of demographic information that you have to have as a starting point. You need to be able to put a name, a face, some relevant demographic information on there, and the emphasis is on relevance. The reason we have that in there, after just talking about how demographics is not the basis, is because a persona has to have empathy behind it. It has to have a name and a face, so a department, a person, a marketer can actually look at it and familiarize themselves and relate to that person. But that's not really the meat of a persona. That just helps to dress it up and make it personable. The real points of a persona are pain points and goals, number 2, the key buying questions, number 3, and real quotes in the same language and the language that the users are using. So points 2, 3, and 4 all relate to one thing, and that's by doing your in-depth user analysis and research. And the only way to do that is through proper actual user surveys, user interviews, workshops. There's a lot of stuff that different optimizers, different marketers like to do. My preference in particular is actually to run a couple of workshops. One of them is always with an internal team, and marketers always like to get involved in that, but the real useful people are the customer facing ones. So that's the sales team. If you're in that sort of line of business, it could also be customer services, because they're the ones who talk to customers every day. They hear their objections, they hear their questions, their problems, their pains. And actually having that information is often something that marketing departments aren't exposed to. I then run an exactly the same workshop, but with only external people. So that could be friendly customers or prospects, people we draft in who are very similar to the target market that we're looking at. Run exactly the same workshop with exactly the same questions, because then we start to get the other information back. We get those key buying questions. What do they have to know before they're going to put in their credit card information into your website? What language are they using that we can replicate on our website to build that familiarity, build out that persona? Once we've done that, we can go into point 5, which is the engagement preferences. Where do these people hang out? As the saying goes, you have to fish where the fish are swimming. So if they're all on Facebook, that's where you have to go. If they're all starting searches on Google, that's where you have to go. It's obvious stuff, but we need to have it listed out in that persona. So again, it is that complete package of marketing and sales information. The 6th point is the conversion requirements. Now, we can use all of the information, and we're going to go into that in a minute as to how we do that, but it's basically a list of the points that they need, how they work psychologically, what do we need to use in order to persuade each one of them to convert. But Johan, back to you to talk about the interviews.
Yeah, Phil referenced workshops there. That's a good way to start. Another good way to kind of discover your personas are through interviews, user interviews. And the people you want to talk to are buyers, non-buyers, lapsed buyers, customer services, the people in your company who are at the front end, the sharp end of dealing with customers every day, will give you lots of nuggets of information. And in talking to those various groups of people, you want to cover a broad spread of demographics. Again, that not being the focus, but you want to cover all your bases. And then the final point there, aim for 5 users per segment. But the difficulty and the interesting thing about this is when you start, you don't know what those segments look like. And the answer there is just to start. As you start talking to people and as you do more interviews, those persona segments, those various personas will start revealing themselves to you. And that is key to personas. You don't go in there with a preconceived idea of what those personas are. Maybe you've got the information from that workshop, that Phil's just referred to. If that's where you started, that's a good starting point, and that can guide you in terms of your interviews. But if you don't have that background, then really you're starting with an open piece of paper, and you will find patterns in those interviews. Now, the kind of things you want to explore with the interviews, it's really a semi-structured interview. In other words, you've got some questions, but you allow the interview to go where it goes. And here are the sample questions that you want to ask. How are you using this product? How would you describe this product to a friend? How would your life be different if this product didn't exist? What alternatives did you consider? Or what alternatives do you use in addition to this product currently? What's been the worst thing? What's been the best thing? What would you change about this product? How would you, if you were the CEO, how would you make it different? And of course, this list is non-exhaustive. There are many similar questions. I'm sure in your own environment, you can think of relevant questions to add to this list. But it's not about the actual question. It's about getting the customer talking, getting the user talking, and what you're looking out for are those reasons that they bought something or did not buy something. The way in which they answer the question often gives you insight into the goals. And remember what we said right at the start, it's all about the goals. It's all about what drives them to come to your site, what drives them to buy your products. And this is what you're trying to get to the bottom of, not their age, gender, and so on. Once you've got all that information, you can plot it in a spreadsheet. This is a format that I use, but of course you can do this many ways. So you have your interviews in the first column, and then you have different columns, motivation. So what is it? What are those goals? What drove them, or what drives them to come to your site? What drives them to buy your product? What drives them to buy your competitor's product? Whatever it is, the scenario, how this fits into their life. That's another important angle with persona, is it can give you an understanding, should give you an understanding of how your site, where your product fits into their life. A quote, which will actually eventually feature on the template, the persona template. Sales objections. Your website is, depending on the context, is a sales person. And when your visitor visits your website or visits a particular page, there is a sales conversation playing out on their page. And it's not, in optimization, it's not about moving stuff around on that page. You know, we obsess over things like UI and where certain things are, and tiny pixels and tiny elements. And really what we should obsess over is that sales conversation. And how do we optimize that sales conversation? And one of the things is to understand what those objections are. What are those sales objections, and documenting them. And in the last column, and this is where we start moving closer to a testing program and how to link these personas to your testing program, then you'll record your hypotheses. In other words, which motivation, for example, is the most important? Which quote, which sales objections? Are they more concerned about X or Y? Is the main selling point for them C or D? And you know, so you'll go on. So you tie that directly to your testing program. And let's get a little bit more deeper into that, because we've now got the personas. We've got hopefully actionable personas. But what we want next is we want some tests coming out of those personas. And this is a good way, we found a good recipe to move from those personas to a testing plan. The first thing is doing an audit of your site, a heuristic evaluation, if you will, but from the perspective of your persona. So you step into your persona, you inhabit that persona, and it's a really interesting and important exercise because it helps you to get rid of those biases that we all have. And so the normal way of doing a heuristic evaluation is as an expert, as a marketer, as a CRO practitioner, as a UX practitioner, whatever the case, you know, you come with that bias and that knowledge, and you do the heuristic evaluation, you do the audit of the site. What we're saying here actually is forget all of that and do it from the perspective of what you've learned about your personas. Then you validate those findings through other data sources, analytics being one of them. And you start marrying the qualitative and the quantitative, but also usability testing. I'll say a few more words about that now. And then after that, you create hypotheses for each persona, and you rank the hypotheses in the way that you normally would do. So using Pi framework or any other framework that you currently use. So usability testing is one of those techniques that I referenced in the previous slide. And the important thing here is when you find those people to test your site, when you recruit those people, is to match them with your personas. Once you know who they are, what they look like, you can start aligning them. And then you would do the usability testing session in the way you normally would do. So you look out for anything that doesn't go right. Okay is not good enough. So what you look out for is any areas where they struggle, any points where they're unsure about how to continue. Those are typically UI issues, but then also questions that come up, those sales objections, those fears, uncertainties, doubts that we spoke about earlier. And then as you document them, you organize them by persona. And then very importantly, to cross-check these findings with other data sources, analytics being one. And important whenever you're working with analytics, but also in this context, to segment it. So you segment it based on what you know about your personas. It could be device or geography like there, but it could be many other things depending on what your persona looks like. Now you've got two lists, one from usability testing and one from this exercise you've just done. And you put them together, you rank them by importance, again, using a framework like Pi, but it could be another. And then that final list, you map to your personas. And then the very last step is to look at those opportunities that have emerged through this process. And you evaluate each of them, again, from the perspective of your persona. So you look at your page, for example, and you ask yourself, does this page talk to your persona? And remember what I said earlier, it is a sales conversation. Does this conversation flow? How is this information revealed in the right order? Is the right image used? And so on. Everything in relation to each different persona. And each of these questions can give rise to different hypotheses, different test ideas. And before you know it, you'll have dozens of test ideas, and all that remains is for them to be ranked. So back to Phil to take us through a very interesting case study to show how this actually works.
Thanks, Johan. Yes. So what I want to talk about is a company called Ricoh. They're a very large global IT company. But one of their business lines, their main business line, is still around photocopiers, printers, or MFPs as they're known, as multifunctional print devices. Now, Ricoh, certainly in the UK and Ireland, and I know in most of their other territories around the world, have a very strong and a very hungry field sales force that rely on leads coming in to be able to actually fill their day and fill their sales quota. So what they do is a lot of PPC activity. They base that around a number of keywords ranging from office printers, leasing office printers, or even entire fleets of office printers. This is the landing page that they originally had before we started working with them. This is a template from their main corporate site. And on the right-hand side is the form that they were asking people to fill in order for them to become a lead and actually make an inquiry to the sales team. So you can see immediately that there's a lot of things wrong. An initial heuristic analysis wouldn't be too difficult on this one. But when you actually start breaking things down, and when you start to look at the copy beyond the obvious stuff, beyond stripping out the side navigation, beyond making it a little bit more pretty, there's actually quite a number of things that we started to notice. So we created a series of personas, and I used the workshop technique that I was talking about before in order to be able to do that effectively. But we created personas based not only around IT managers and procurement managers and stuff like this in various businesses, but it was also around the CEO. There was also a number around different functions and departments that wanted to have print in their floor or their level of their business. So these personas, again, very much based on data, based on quite extensive user research, and we do some psychographic analysis in there as well, and create user temperament charts and things, which allows us to know what kind of language and what kind of page format people most respond to. But most importantly, It tells us what the value proposition is. It tells us what they need to see in order to want to start having that sales conversation that Johan was talking about. So we use these personas, and actually talking to people, it was very obvious that the standard corporate site was not really fit for purpose in a sales sense. It was okay from a brand sense, but from a sales sense, it wasn't really working. So we used these to completely redesign what that homepage, or what the landing pages from PPC need to look like. And as you remember from what the previous version looked like, this is how the new version played out. And you can see it's very different. And you can see it's far more graphical. It actually has a picture of a printer, quite large, and pride of place on there. But we also now start to have some of the key elements that we were told about in the persona research. So controlling the printing costs. That's right there in the headline. It's the value proposition, if you like, with the subheader underneath it, because that is by far and away the most popular piece of information that we got from the personas. Every business wants to control their printing costs. If you imagine some of these companies have got 4,000 printers in their fleet, and all of a sudden they're all printing out 400 or 500 pages a day, it actually becomes a fairly big cost drain on an enterprise level. What we also found out was that most of the people in here were of a competitive nature, and they preferred bullet points. They wanted to make their own decisions on things. They wanted to see some research and evidence. So actually having key points, again, the other elements that, apart from controlling printing costs, that came out in the personas are all there in the bullets. We have a testimonial that backs that up. The form is now a third of the size that it was before, still having enough information for the sales team in there. And it's also pride of place. We use a contrasting color button. One of the old fables of CRO is that everything's about button color. But actually, it does need to stand out on a page. It's the main CTA. It's where you want people's eyes to be drawn. So we relaunched these, and they were all very much tailored. There's different landing pages for each ad group and relating to different keywords. Obviously, you need to make it as relevant as you can at all times. But the results were quite impressive. And so when we relaunched within the first week, and we'd actually done a couple of iterative tests through that, we started to see some quite nice numbers. I've had to blur out some of them because obviously it's commercially sensitive information, but you can see from there that the first test was doing okay. That was fine. When we got to the second major test, we were already jumping up to a conversion rate of 18.18%, and that's people coming from AdWords who actually filled in the form. So these people were becoming marketing qualified leads, as they were calling them. That's an increase of 366% from their AdWords campaign. Now, globally, they spend well over $100,000 a month on AdWords. So actually having that kind of increase in ROI is a really big thing for them. And suddenly it made what was becoming a rapidly ineffective marketing source through PPC suddenly became cost effective again. So that's just really illustrating how we can use personas to create some proper real world value in there. So I know I want to pass back now because I know we have another real world conversion story to tell.
So thanks, Will. So discussing about a real world conversion story, there was this one particular story which I came across while reading NPR, which was of Facebook, and Facebook was kind of under a lot of criticism in terms of not handling censorship responsibly, because they were kind of facing criticism in terms of a lot of users were kind of feeling kind of getting offensive in terms of tagging other people, or they even tried to maybe build a robust algorithm in terms of catching on different phrases and keywords which kind of are abusive or kind of hurts the sentiment of other people. And there were kind of widespread criticism for Facebook that they're not taking action against the user complaints which they're getting. But the problem with Facebook was that they were kind of fielding 4 million complaints a week, which is a gigantic number. And the nature of these complaints were basically around that users are kind of getting offended by somebody tagging them in a post which they don't like, or uploading pictures or videos which are kind of embarrassing them. So Facebook kind of took the persona approach here, where they out of these 4 million complaints, they kind of build a segment of teenagers they reached out to, and they kind of reached out to in a in an interview fashion. Like Johan kind of comprehensively discussed about the interview mechanism, where we kind of need to identify the motivation, what are the expectation, and what kind of things are the drivers for them. So Facebook kind of adopted a similar approach where they kind of interviewed a segment of teenagers, and in the interview they kind of ask questions like how does the post they kind of reported to Facebook is what how does that post made them feel. So there were people responding, uh, there were users responding to those questionnaire with a variety of expression that there were some people who were kind of afraid by looking at the picture they were kind of tagged in, or some were angry, some were feeling embarrassed, and some were even sad. Then there was another question which Facebook kind of asked in its questionnaire, was that why didn't these people reach directly to the person who has kind of uploaded this photo or a post. So they realized that there is a friction point where these users felt that at the end of the day, the people who kind of posted the picture or the post are at the end of the day they are their friends, and they don't want to offend them by reaching out and saying that hey, that I feel embarrassed, or that I say, hey, you take this down because I'm kind of angry and things like that. They just wanted Facebook to be the mediator there and kind of request them in terms of either drop the tag, drop them as a tag on the post, or take it down because it's part of a public humiliation for them. And they although say, at the same time they don't want to report abuse to that post, because they thought that Facebook might take a serious action against them, saying that as you kind of bringing public humiliation, so maybe we will block your account and things like that. So they didn't wanted to take a serious action against the friends who kind of originally posting these pictures. So what Facebook did after collating all the data from the customer interview or the segment interview, which they did with the persona, was they create multiple variations of the complaint form, which they used to hold on every post for people who kind of felt either offended or are not kind of very happy with the post they're kind of tagged in. So the multivariation of those posts were kind of basically phrases which kind of resonated with what they're feeling, because that's one data which they kind of collected in the customer interview which they were doing with these people. So they were they were complaint forms which says that I'm feeling embarrassed by your post, or it's a bad picture of me, so can you like take it down, or it really makes me sad to see the picture. And there was another variation which says that it's an inappropriate. So this was one part of the challenge, that they wanted to fix things with users reaching out to other users and fixing their problem there then and there. But another problem was that which kind of a complaint is kind of right suited for the person who is kind of publishing all these posts. How in a simpler fashion we can kind of make him understand and do the desired action there, which is either to take down the photo or the post, or remove the tag of that person who or he or she is kind of offending. So with this exercise, with this A/B test kind of a thing, Facebook uh, kind of worked with the one form which says that it's kind of embarrassing for me to basically look at the post which you kind of shared, and it kind of offends me a little. And they see that there's a 85% likelihood of the person who's kind of posted this posted this post or a picture to take the required action. So you can see that not just in marketing, or not just in other functions in conversion optimization, uh, personas kind of helps in defining and solving your day-to-day business problems. So this was a major problem which Facebook kind of faced with the customer handling team, support team, and this is how they kind of solve it with defining personas. So basically, to summarize whatever we discussed in the presentation, is the first point is that you are not your user. Taking an example that say I'm a marketer and VW caters to a target audience of marketers for doing A/B testing, conversion optimization. But the other problem is that I have the curse of knowledge, and I know my product so well that I feel that whatever terminologies or whatever I feel as a person or as a professional, my customers would be feeling the same way. But that's not correct, because what you can see right now, what I'm trying to do is that I have a lot of assumption about my customer. I feel that they're exactly like me, but that's not the case. I'm not backing my assumptions with data. I'm just building some guesses around how my targeted customers kind of behave. Second thing is that which I already covered, is that there's no guessing around your persona. It always has to be driven down from your qualitative and quantitative data. And last but not least, personas reflect the current situation. So we always try to think that maybe there are developing situations, and as people take their own example and they see that things are developing in the future, so they try to take things 2 years or 3 years down the line, saying that this role with automation and AI coming to the scene, that this role will kind of evolve to this, and the customer expectation or the user expectation would kind of evolve with it, which is a good way of kind of predicting things. But with personas, it's best if you can keep things grounded, if you keep things as per the current situation, and the correct connecting it with the current scenario, the current expectation and challenges which your customers and users face. And it's best to build personas around those things, and then not kind of evolutionizing your personas to something which you have no knowledge about or have no data about. So yeah, basically we want to end the session with a quote by Roy Williams, where he says that your business has 3 or 4 customers living at thousands of different addresses. This quote comes from the book from The Wizard of Ads. And yeah, so basically your customers are kind of divided into 3 or 4 personas, and which might be uh, great in numbers, but yeah, they may, if you kind of sketch a persona and you see that they're not very different, and you kind of define it with the challenges and the expectation they come with. Juan, you want to add something to this?
No, Akash, thanks. I think we've summarized it well, and I wonder if there are any questions.
Yeah, so with that, we will kickstart our Q&A session. I request all you guys to ask questions around the presentation, around personas, if you have. Maybe we can start by my question first. I wanted to know, Joan, from you and from Phil, that have you experienced any situation where a bad persona has kind of hurt a brand or a business?
Yeah, I'd like to hear Phil's perspective on this as well. What I can tell you is that sometimes what I do is actually create negative personas. So those would be personas who I regard as people that we don't want to serve in this particular context. So it would be the kind of customer that you want to fire. So maybe it's a customer that you currently have, but it's an unprofitable customer. It actually costs you more to serve that customer than it does. And so that would be an example of a negative persona. Or another example would be somebody who's just not a qualified lead. This would be, for example, in the context of a lead generation business, insurance, or financial services. So it's not uncommon, Utkarsh, to find negative personas to balance those the other personas that you actually do want to serve. It's important to recognize there are those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to extend on that, I think as well is an example of personas really hurting a business is earlier in the presentation we showed some personas from quite a mainstream dating website, and also one from a new student app that was around food. The idea of the app was quite sound. It was basically all allowing students all around the world to be able to target new places to eat, particularly or for vegan or vegetarian diets, and telling them where they can go and what times it's open, and ranking it all quite a good idea. They invested $1 million into setting up this app and launching it in various places around the US. And the whole business was based on those personas, which were very light and, as we illustrated, were pretty much based on guesswork. They weren't based on any data at all. That company burned through the $1 million in about the first 7 months and never attracted any further investment again. So that's probably one real world example of how getting the wrong personas can actually have a serious financial and commercial impact.
Great. So we have one question. Joe asked us a question saying that, how we can leverage Google Analytics data or quantitative data we have around our visitors in terms of building personas.
Yeah,
So maybe
so
Joe can take it up.
I'll start, and Phil, you can also come in.
Sure.
But in any CRO project, hopefully, if you're doing optimization, what you're doing is you're starting with research, and hopefully you're doing enough research. You're doing a lot of it. So you're looking at your GA, and when you do GA, you do all the segmentation. So we spoke about 2 segments, but of course there's a long list, and you're doing interviews with customers, you're doing usability testing sessions, you're doing surveys, and a range of various research methodologies to gain insights and to understand where the opportunities are. And all of that is the starting point for personas. So when you look at, and that's the point that I tried to make earlier, is that the misconception, I think the biggest misconception with personas is that people think it's about the sketch, and it's about this template that contains a picture, a name, and some things around it. But that's the wrong emphasis. The emphasis should be on the research, and and personas are just a way to package that research. So it sounds, when you're asking that question, how do you use these various data points? It sounds like you've already made good progress. All you need to do now is take those various data sources and plot out the insights that bubble up to the top from those various pockets of research, and see what the patterns are, and see how you can arrange those patterns, how they fit together, and out of that your personas will emerge. I will say this as well, that we spoke about 2 techniques, and I think those are really good techniques to bring it all together. The one is the workshop methodology, and the other one is the interviews. We found those to be the most useful, the most powerful ways in which to really bring the personas out. So I would say that if you have already those other sources of data that you've referred to, then to just close the loop by doing one of those 2 exercises or both, and then not to be too distracted by the pressure to create these templates that you will call personas. Just let it flow. Let the personas reveal themselves to you. Look at your data, look at what the patterns are, and out of that, you will build the understanding of your personas. And you also don't need, I believe, the pressure of a deadline, of a time frame. Over time, maybe you start with 3-4 personas. In a couple of months, after you've done some more research, maybe you've run a few A/B tests, another persona reveals themselves to you, and so it goes on. Phil?
Yeah, it's really just to echo what you were saying there, Johan. I think the role of GA in building a persona is twofold. One is it does help to shape the kind of people that are coming to your website in a very simplistic way, also looking at the customer journeys people are taking. In terms of building personas, the most useful way to use GA is actually to verify, and we covered this a bit earlier, is to verify what people are telling you in those user interviews. So for example, if you're on a a standard e-commerce site, and they're saying, no, the problem page is always the payment. I don't trust this website. It doesn't feel quite right when I have to enter my credit card information. But actually, if you go then into GA and it looks like, well, actually that page isn't the problem, then it's something is disconnected. However, if GA is backing up what they're saying and all of a sudden there's a huge drop off in the funnel at that particular point, then you can say, actually, yeah, that's a really crucial part that I need to address, and that becomes a really high priority in my testing list. And so that's the main way to use GA in terms of building personas. Obviously, in terms of the wider CRO practice, it's a lot more crucial for different parts. But in terms of building personas, that's generally how I use GA.
Awesome. We have another question from Mark. Mark asked us that after following the persona sketch, is there a way to kind of validate that, whatever persona you have built are correct, so that they ensure that they are not bad personas? Or
I would say that's an ongoing process. I mean, just Phil just described very eloquently how to use GA, and I agree with it. Not only GA, so GA, heat maps, scroll maps, and other quantitative tools, and even qualitative things like surveys and so on. But what you're doing is you're constantly building on that understanding of your various personas, I find. A tool that's, or a methodology, a method that's sometimes not used specifically for the purpose of insight generation is VWO. It is your split testing. VWO is a great tool to validate an hypothesis and to prove the value of a certain intervention, to illustrate that it is a winner, it's a better version of the page or the experience, and B, that it is a certain quantum of uplift, a certain effect that you can quantify. And that's a very important part of it. But the other important angle to VWO and split testing tools is to gain insights and to further your understanding of your customer and of your user. And when you have well-defined personas, over time, that understanding will grow as you launch and conclude more split tests. Each time you run a test, each time you conclude a test, you will learn if you do it properly, if you have an hypothesis that's formulated properly, if it's grounded in the persona, grounded in the research, you will learn something more about that persona and about what shifts their behavior that you perhaps didn't know before, or perhaps suspected before, but it's now been validated. And that's really powerful.
It is, and I absolutely agree with everything that Johan said, and that is the only true way to be able to do it. From a day-to-day practicality perspective of sat there in your organization, in your business, there is a very quick way of being able to semi-validate the personas, and that is to actually take them to the customer-facing teams, and that's hopefully sales, if not customer service, or even just some of the other marketing department, and actually just run it past them, present it to them, and actually they will quickly tell you, yes, that's pretty much bang on, or no, that's not. And it's not going to be perfect. The way Johan described it is the perfect way of doing it. But in terms of getting very quick feedback and actually just getting people to buy into it in the wider organization, then you can actually just engage them in the process, and they will very often help you and give you honest feedback at the end of it, and see if they actually recognize the personas and the people they talk to every day. That's the cheats way.
Awesome.
So Taj, just to add one more point, and to that question, is you have to also be open to changing, adjusting your personas as you come into new information, new insights that suggest that perhaps a tweak is necessary. You have to be open to that flexibility.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, ultimately, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because markets change, people change, attitudes change. Your personas are a living, breathing person, and therefore they are going to adapt. And this a mistake I see quite a lot is that people say, yeah, we've got great personas, we did them 10 years ago. And it's like, yeah, okay, things have changed slightly since then, just if nothing else in the way people communicate and think about things and research things. So they are a living, breathing entity that need to evolve. And so absolutely do not be afraid to, at times, look at them and just think, yeah, these are now completely out of date and they need updating or they need some tweaking. It should be done. It should be updated as regularly as you can afford the time to do so.
Awesome. I think we going to have a very comprehensive answer on that one. Yeah. So with that, I think we don't have any more questions for the Q&A. So Joanne and Phil, thanks a lot for taking out the time to come here and share your experience with us. Thanks to all the attendees for attending this session. We will be coming back again very soon with another exciting subject from the world of conversion optimization. Till then, keep optimizing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.